just do this in a really informal way. And when I ask the questions, if you have something you want to talk about growing up in Middletown, or even something you know, just share it with us. It should be a lot of fun because we all have similar memories from being here at the same time. We'll start with sharing some of your favorite memories growing up in Middletown. What are some of your favorite memories? Who would like to start?
I will, and I can mention one that everybody heard sitting on the park bench outside of Rudy's drinking beer. That's very true.
That's very true.
Yeah. And Mary Fulmer sweeping the curb and gutter on a regular basis.
No, as a matter of fact, I took Ollie out to Rudy's on occasion.
It's funny because I can see Ollie walking out to Rudy's.
I think she did walk.
Yeah, we sat on the front porch and watched her.
And that was regular.
Well, that's a good memory. And Rudy's used to be so much more colorful than it is now. It was just sort of a wooden bench, and
Park bench. Yeah.
it was a bench sort of over from it because there was some law that it couldn't actually be on the property, but it was in front of the farmhouse or something,
Yeah.
out on the road. What are some other memories?
Well, I grew up, I came to Middletown in 1947. I was born in D.C., but I came here when I was 9 months old. Of course, my parents were both from the Wilkesboro area and graduated from Middletown High School. But I spent about the first 4 years down at a house on the west side of Kugel Alley and Main Street, and we lived in the upstairs, the second floor. And one of my best friends early on was John Horman, who later was a classmate for 12 years. But a couple of my other friends were the Slifer boys. And the youngest one was, I think, Tommy, and he had two or three other brothers. But Tommy was the youngest, and he was still about 2 or 3 years older than me, but he introduced me to words that a 40-year-old shouldn't repeat to his parents, I tell you.
I can imagine. The infamous Slifer boy.
Yeah.
And I remember at Halloween trick-or-treating in Middletown, it was always a threat that you'd run into the Slifer boy. When they used to throw corn and stuff at people, or napkins tied up with flour in them. You don't remember?
I don't remember that.
Tommy and Kenny and Delano.
Yes. Yes.
I remember our motorcycle gang member.
Oh, Chuck.
Yes.
Did you ever ride on Chuck's motorcycle?
Oh, no.
I did.
Did you?
Yes. And you were actually along that evening.
Oh.
I got on the back of Chuck's motorcycle and went to Newtown.
Tell me more, Butch.
And I think Alan did too. I guess you and Lisa were afraid to do that.
Well, probably.
Probably.
Drinking beer, I guess?
No. We were too young. What was one of your favorite memories of going to school on Prospect Street? Any favorite memories of that? I know Doug has a lot of memories of that too.
I just remember walking quite a ways because,
Yeah.
down here on Main Street, and, I'm sure I walked by the time I was 6 and by myself.
Miss Edna Leiter,
Yeah,
first grade
yeah.
teacher.
She sent me
Charlotte.
home one day.
Oh.
Hayes.
Yeah, Miss
Didn't have her.
Very good teacher.
Did
Well,
she really?
She did.
he
I think I
cried
talked
every
too
day in
much.
first grade.
She
So.
just said, Nancy, go home.
I did.
Oh my golly.
Was it Miss Hayes?
Yeah, no,
Miss
Miss
Leiter.
Edna.
And she, when an organ, they had an organ, she played an organ in the classroom.
I don't remember.
That was
Was that
Who did have it?
Miss Edna?
No, I think that was Carlotta. Wasn't it?
I never had Carlotta either.
You didn't?
No, I didn't.
No, he did, but I didn't.
Yeah, Sue
I had Miss
Gainber
Coulter.
had Miss Edna, and then the next year Carlotta started. So it was
Okay.
Yeah.
right there, and I'm not sure what year that would have been. But
One
it
of
was,
the fondest memories of elementary school. It wasn't a fond memory, but third grade we had Mrs. Holtby,
yes.
and every boy after the first probably 3 weeks of school had a butch cut because she would pull your hair.
Oh, I remember hearing that.
And she had a big yardstick too,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which she used.
Well, my first memory of Ethel Holter was I had gotten this little silver ring out of Beachley's gumball machine on Main Street, and my brother wanted to wear it to school, and so Ethel Holter took it. Well, I was a little upset. And he told her, he said, well, that ring belongs to my brother. And she said, well, you tell him he has to come see me to get the ring back. So I went up and I had to sit on her lap and give her a kiss. And then she gave my ring back. And now she'd probably be arrested.
Sexual harassment.
Yes, I completely forgot that. Any other stories of?
I have a good memory of playing kickball behind the school.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
every
Oh,
elementary
every-
used to go.
yeah.
Until lights came on. When
Kick-
lights came on, you
I
had
was
to go
gonna say,
home.
windows were like a global
Yeah.
virus if we could. But yeah, lots of kickball back there.
Kickballs and marbles.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
I mean, guys would win bags of marbles
Yeah,
from
that's
every
right.
each body.
Cat
If you weren't a good marble shooter, you didn't play.
Butch, do you remember in Carlotta's Mrs. Holt Ethel's class, somebody was given a report or something and they fainted, and she had somebody pick her up by the legs.
Oh my.
And do you remember anything like that?
And hold her upside down?
Yeah.
I don't. Was that in our class?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I probably blocked her from
Hoping you've never fainted.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
She was something. I mean, she was quite, and she always smelled like cloves. Remember, she'd always eat cloves. Yeah. So she'd have, I guess,
Freshman.
fresh breath. I don't know. But
Eat
eat cloves.
Oh.
I don't remember because I did wasn't in her.
She didn't smile very much.
None of us ever kissed her.
Oh.
Yeah, there.
God, none of the rest of us kissed her, so you were probably the only one.
Oh, everybody knew she smelled like cloves. Well, that's true. I'm sure, but she did that a lot. Any other memories of Prospect Street?
Was Herbie Davis a principal there?
No,
Fred Ward.
Fred
J.
Ward.
Ward from
Fred
Liberty
Yes.
Town.
Was he still the principal when you were there?
Yep.
Was he?
He was there a
He
long
was there
time.
a long time, yes.
My mother used to cross us across the street and we'd have to walk up by ourselves. And then it was up to my brothers and sisters to bring me back down and then she could cross us back across the street. Well, couldn't have been, not long into first grade, my brother and sister left me. And I was scared to death to walk down the street by myself. And I can just remember screaming and crying. And they kept saying, oh, they'll be back for you. And I'm saying, I don't think so.
That's true. We would walk home to lunch.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Oh.
Yes, we always walked home to lunch.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I would just walk out of school and go home for lunch. Can you imagine doing that now? Oh my.
That's the other thing. There were always alleys that you could.
Yes.
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 Do you remember riding your bikes around town? Or?
I said I went everywhere in town on my bike. Everywhere.
We all did, actually.
We would go out of town, back, Old Middletown Road,
Yeah.
and go for picnics and stuff like that.
And my
In the
brother and I would
summertime,
ride to my aunt's farm back on Buzzard Road.
We would go all
Really?
day.
Yes, yes. We go, well, we wouldn't ride our bikes across the fields to what we call the Bluebell Field, but you remember doing that?
I remember going somewhere where there were
Yeah, where was
cowboys. We
that-
made up stories about, they
Right.
weren't really cow bones. They were, you know, some,
All of the farms off of Jefferson Street were the main farms that they used for crops and the cattle, and we'd walk across the fields or through the corn to what we called the bluebell field, because in the spring it was completely covered with bluebells. And there had a stream going through it. Beyond that, towards the creek, is where the Maines threw all of their bones or
Oh, okay.
from butchering the cows for the meat market. And so there was just like a path, and on both sides were piles of bones, which to us, you can imagine.
you know, we just, it couldn't be cow bones. It
Well,
had to be-
I know. And but now that's South Middletown, the development, the whole thing. What businesses do you remember on Main Street? And there were some really special ones.
There's
Names.
Maine,
Ingles.
Gates.
Bob and Don.
Yeah.
Bottom garage.
Play there.
Yes, we did.
Durst Store is one of my favorite memories. How many of you remember that, Durst Store? It was- I thought it was unique.
Warren's Mini Shop.
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say.
Long
And
Yeah.
long. Go down and get your new
Yeah.
Well, Beachley's, Marcy was talking about Beachley's.
That, they owned it,
That way,
Gates' owned
yeah,
it.
we would walk in there and get penny candy and drinks for a nickel, and they'd have a chessboard back there. These men be playing chess with a wood stove.
Oh, he means Beachley's up there.
Yeah,
Yes.
you
Where
remember that?
Yeah, well, Darren bought that house.
Oh.
That's Darren,
That's true.
Darren's
And
house.
fixed it up.
That's true, I forgot that.
Yeah,
But
on
yes.
East Main Street.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, yes, that's where
Little beach.
we used to go there a lot. Did you ever go up there, Nancy? From down?
It was,
By it,
I was gonna say,
walked
we
by it.
never,
Walked by it
we
when we
didn't,
went
I
to
was
high
gonna
school,
say,
but
but
never
we
went to
went
that
more down this way.
We used to go all the time because it was closer for us.
Yes,
I was gonna
yes.
say.
Go up there and we just get bread and milk. Mother would
And
send us
candy.
up for that, candy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And the gumball machine.
Where was Beach?
Beachley's up
Catty corner across from where Ingles is now.
Yeah.
the second house.
Second house up the
Second
block.
house from
And
Ingles.
that became a pool hall?
Yeah,
Yeah.
pool hall when we were in high school.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yeah. but we
Walter
remember
Beachley.
Beachley.
Yeah.
Was that still, the store still there? It was.
Oh, yeah, because
Yeah.
Joe, I don't know, did Joe Schaefer ever own that?
I
He
think,
worked there, I know.
I think he might have after
Bought
Mr.
after
Beachley.
Beachley, yeah.
I think he might
Yeah,
have.
because I lived in Beachley's, second place we lived in Middletown was on
Right.
Main Street. Beachley's, it was Beachley's house.
Mhm.
We lived on
Walter
the second
Beachley,
floor.
yeah.
Yeah, second floor.
Yes,
And
yes.
of course, that was only two stores or two houses away.
Yes,
But,
yes. Oh, good. Well, I'm not gonna ask you when your family got a telephone because I know
We were
everybody-
talking about that though, remembering our first, I'll always remember my number from
Yeah.
my first number.
And you're on a party line.
Yeah, and we were on a party
Oh,
line,
that's
yeah.
true.
Butch,
Yes.
something, maybe
Mine
Sharon
was
could tell
before
better
that.
about this, our experience with Buell and Irene Leiter. We lived
Oh.
next door to
We
them,
lived next door to them.
and they were the telephone operators.
And so when we'd get a call, one time particularly I answered and she said, well, you're sounding better. And then one time, almost always, if we weren't home, she'd tell the
Where we were, where
one
we
time
going.
she says, well, I think she's taking the car and going to Frederick and he's out mowing. And then one time we were way up north, up around Thurmont at a party, and we got a phone call. And the people had called us and they just called my
was
mother,
forwarded up
found
there.
out where we were, and directed our phone calls all up there.
Buell and Irene,
We got phone calls wherever we were.
wonderful neighbors.
Yeah, yeah. I remember Mother one time saying Alan had done something, and she must have been a little bit hysterical trying to get Dr. Harp, and so the Leiter girls knew she was upset, so they interrupted the phone call
Yeah.
from him so she could talk to the doctor. Now that's very personal, isn't
That
it?
is
We
very
had
Yeah.
personal attention.
Well, I remember how stupid we were. My brother was, of course, it was his idea,
It was
not
all
mine.
gay.
But to pick up the telephone and say some nasty things. And of course, dummy us didn't realize. They knew it right away.
Pick
who it
up and
was.
listen to the other person.
And so she
on the
called right
party
back and
line.
got my mother on the phone.
Uh-oh. Well, that's what older brothers do.
Yes, tell me about it.
Well, and we don't really remember a whole lot about living here during World War II because,
Well, I can remember you had to pull down the blinds when they'd have an air raid.
oh,
And
do you?
yes, and turn off the lights. And you get rations to go to like Maine's for meat and that kind of stuff.
And you were pretty young.
Well, I can remember it, but
Yeah,
I hope
yeah.
I was young then.
Well,
Yeah,
well, you
Second
had to
World
be-
War,
you had
yeah.
to be during World War
But
II
pulling down the blinds, yeah.
because most of us weren't here. Good for you. How about going to the Memorial Hall for movies? Did any of you do that ever?
Yes.
Or you? I did. I did once. I went to see Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now,
When did it close? You know?
The 50s?
as a movie theater, it would have had to have been the early
50s?
50s or late 40s.
And the fire company was on the left side and the library on the right side.
Yes, yes.
And then the schools would have minstrel shows there and the
Yeah.
other
I
things.
remember Mr.
Yeah, we
Shea.
had mentioned.
I remember going to plays because I remember going
Yeah.
to see Arsenic and Old Lace.
There?
Uh-huh.
Really?
And I can't remember, who the performers were.
Yeah.
Didn't they have that as the school for
Yes, they
Yeah.
did for a
Yeah.
while.
brief period
Sixth
brief
grade,
period
Yes.
of time while the
Schools.
Yes. But when my sister was in the 7th grade, her class went to school in the Memorial Hall because they were building the addition to the
Elementary.
high school,
Oh, high school.
the old high school. I do remember
I
that.
remember too that there were a few years that they had a home show in there, or a community show.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Community show.
community
Yeah.
show used to be in there.
Grange.
And Grange
Yes.
met there.
Yes.
We
And
met there.
the
And then
floor
the
was
Grange on the
slanted.
second floor with me.
And, well, we had the junior Grange, I was in downstairs while they were upstairs.
And we'd go to the Fireman's Auxiliary Christmas party upstairs. Do any of you remember doing that?
I remember going upstairs. I don't remember.
Jay? No? You, Doug?
The only time I remember going upstairs was I was a very small kid. I think there was a wedding or something, wedding reception or something up there that mom was involved with, and guess I tagged along or something.
And the Eastern Star used to be up there too, I think.
Eastern Star used to be there.
Uh,
Mother was an Eastern Star.
I remember one time at one of the auxiliary Christmas parties, Santa Claus was wearing high heels. My brother said to me, of course, he said, "Look at Santa's shoes." And I was kind of very confused about it. And the houses you grew up in Middletown. Well, Tom has a family home.
Yeah, which my son lives in now, and grandson.
Yes, and I'm still in the same house where I was born. And anybody else? Your family home?
I actually grew up on the corner of Washington and Jefferson. Yeah.
With your grandparents?
With my grandparents, right?
Oh.
Yeah, there's a little side apartment there.
Mhm. Yeah, and I
My
remember
home-
them so
My
well.
home on Main Street was owned originally by my grandmother, and then we bought it, and then I was born and raised there. We
Oh.
just sold that, 2 years ago?
Was that your grandparents?
That was
Grandmother.
grandmother's.
Your
My
grandmother.
grandparents were divorced.
Oh,
My grandfather lived on the farm, and my grandmother had some of her own money, and she bought that place for herself.
oh, good for her. That's great.
Very unusual, very
Yes.
unusual.
Was Dr. Hart next door then?
Dr. Harp was next door. Well, the house we live in now is Dr. Harp's. And we had a room that was on the side that had an entrance to it that was his office. And then he went from the house I grew up in to the house next door from Miss Pearl and eventually here.
Well, Nancy, you grew up in the house where, on West Main Street.
Main Street, but it's been sold a couple of times.
Yes, yes. But you were there a long time.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I didn't grow up in Middletown. I grew up on a farm in the valley between Middletown and Jefferson. My roots were kind of divided between Middletown and Jefferson. We came to church and school in Middletown. My 4-H and ball activities were in Jefferson, so I had, you could say I had two sets of friends.
Yes.
Yeah, but my family, my brother and my two sisters, were the 5th generation on our farm.
Wow, that's great.
My sons will be the 6th generation. So our families have been here. We're descendants of Peter Hansen Buzzard. I'm sure you've heard that name in your discussions and
Oh,
everything.
definitely.
He had 8 sons, and he was a very wealthy man in his time.
And
And
talk about how he got his money, but he had lots of
but he bought 7 of his sons each a farm. The other son he sent to college. We are the only original farm owned by, all the other farms have been dispersed or got rid of.
Oh, that's really,
That's some history.
well, it is a good piece of history.
But the houses I remember growing up in Middletown, of course, the church, we lived in the church practically. My Uncle Glenn and Ruth Gaver lived on, what is that street?
Maple.
Maple. Yeah. We would come there, if we had some activities at the church or whatever, we would come and spend an evening with them and have supper there until they could come in from the farm and pick us up. So that was one of the houses I remember in Middletown.
Oh, yeah, it was a distinct location, I always remember.
And Uncle Glenn was very meticulous.
Well,
Those of you,
gardener.
those of you can remember his azaleas.
Oh.
I mean,
And his garden in general.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
It was beautiful.
The house was meticulous as well
Yes.
inside.
Yes.
Well, they never had any kids, so.
But yeah, it was a beautiful
Uncle
garden.
Glenn was he worked at the Navy Yard for a lot of his life, but then he became a painter with him and Musty Stein. Did a lot of painting, drinking and painting.
In that order?
Then we finished furniture.
Yeah, he refinished furniture. He was very, very good at that.
And he did all those toxic things and he lived to be 90, what? And I often say that, well, when they banded like paint with
Lead.
paint, I said,
That's all he ever used.
right, look at Glenn Gaver. I mean, wow. So, didn't have any adverse effects.
Now, what was his brother? Was it brother?
Raymond.
Raymond.
Yeah.
Raymond.
Where did we go to see the inauguration when we were in like 3rd or 4th grade? Was that Raymond's?
Yes,
Remember
yes, on Franklin Street.
Yeah, Eisenhower's.
Yes.
Let's see. I guess it would have been his 52. We went down.
Yes.
They took so many first graders, I guess. it was.
Right, right. And we all sat there and watched an inauguration, which was very boring.
Yeah.
But I do remember it very clearly. And that was very generous for somebody to let us come to their house and do that. It really was.
They must have split the classes up because I remember going to the house that was on the corner of Main Street and Prospect Street.
Really?
Which at that time was, I guess, rented by the Relke family.
Okay.
And I remember a bunch of us going in there and watching them. Of course, not everybody back then had a TV. So,
Right. Right.
That was kind of a big thing to a lot
Well,
of kids.
and I guess that's why everybody behaved, because it was something unusual for a lot of them. So that's, yes, that's true. I'd forgotten about that too. Yeah. And Faye, you live not far from where you grew up.
True, yeah. We
Yes.
lived in the orchard. It was the orchard when I was growing up.
Mhm.
My parents built it up.
Can you tell us some stories about your brother and you?
It's best that I don't.
But one thing I remember about him was because I lived right across the street and we were next door neighbors who got married. but her brother would stand out in the orchard
Oh, yeah.
and swat baseballs till the sun went down. And that's why he became a pretty good baseball hitter. It was a hand-eye coordination that he developed from throwing an apple up and smashing it with the baseball.
Oh, wow. Wow.
We raised steers. The only problem is one time we did have a pet steer, Mikey, and that was sad because all of a sudden Mikey was gone, and we sort of knew what happened to Mikey.
Oh.
And the biggest thing that I remember is that for dinner one night, after Mikey was gone for quite a while, we had steak. And Johnny and I both sat there and cried because we thought, no, we can't. And my father was so angry because he knew he did a mistake by allowing us to have a pet. He was angry at himself.
Oh.
So, of course, Mother always said, oh, that's not Mikey. Every time we had anything beef, oh, no, that's not Mikey. Mikey's on the other side of the freezer.
Sure.
Yeah. But Mikey was a beautiful little steer. We still have pictures.
I remember one time you and I cooked dinner for your brother.
Oh, yeah.
He didn't
Yeah.
like the frozen peas.
Yeah. Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did.
Wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
do we have any other stories to share while we're all here? Can you think of any?
I remember going to baseball games on Sunday afternoons up here,
On the
Paul
farm,
Stroud.
yeah.
Across from where I live.
Yes, where you live, yeah.
Yeah, athletic field.
But,
That's the high school athletic
Yeah.
field.
They used
yeah,
to have
well,
nice
yes,
crowds
yeah, back
there,
then it
too.
was.
They had
And
nice
that's where
crowds.
Charlie Keller started.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was something to do on Sunday afternoons.
After church, it wasn't during church.
Oh, yeah, after church.
Yeah.
We used to pass the hat.
I used to remember play days, which I hated.
Yeah, in Frederick at
Well, we,
we-
the first one was up
Make
here
your
on the
sit-upon.
park.
You
Yeah,
were
make
thinking
the
of May Day.
sit-upons.
That was May Day.
May Day, yeah.
Oh, that was
Play
play
day.
day.
yeah, make a dance sit upon.
I know.
Yes, that's
True.
the
Yeah.
dance. Everybody had to
Oh,
learn to
yeah.
dance.
Yeah.
Folk dancing.
Yes. Jane, what you were talking about Pete. Sorry.
Even though I didn't grow up here in town, I had the rare privilege of going to Dr. Hart. And it was right at, and I had heard a lot of stories about him. And it was right after Janie and I were married, and I didn't have it, and we had moved back here, and I didn't have a doctor. So I had developed a pretty bad sore throat. So Janie says, well, come on, I'll take you down to see Dr. Hart. And that was when he was on Main Street beside the bank. And so we went in, and of course there was nobody in there. He come out and he looked and saw Jane and said, you know, what are you doing here? And she said, well, this is my husband. He's got a sore throat. And so he said, did you get married? He said, yeah. He says, well, come on back here, let me look. So he took me back, and while I had a tongue depressor looking down my throat, he says, does Evelyn like you? I said, uh-huh. He says, does Mr. George like you? I said, uh-huh. He said, you got a sore throat. And he had a big gallon jar of tetracycline, and I'll never forget it. And he had those little pill envelopes, and he didn't count them out or anything. He just dumped the whole thing in there and folded it up. He said, now you take those and you'll be fine. And so I said, all right, what do I owe you? He said, well, that'll be a wedding present. And that was,
Or how much do you have in your pocket?
Yeah, that's
well,
what, yeah.
I
it
had
used to be
heard
how
some
much
stories
you
that
have.
he'd see how much do you have in your pocket, but he said this will be a wedding present.
Well, that's like the first time I went to Europe. I went down and I said, should I have any shots? And he said no. And we continued talking, and I said, how much do I owe you? He said, well, just have a drink while you're there and think of me. Well, I'm certainly pleased with everybody's memories, and thank you for sharing them. And I'm glad you all could be here with us. And I think we're...
John, I have one question.
Oh, what?
Back in probably 56, 57, the town was torn up with, I thought, new water lines. Does anybody remember what we did?
The sewer line. The septic.
It was
Septic
septic,
system.
okay.
Well,
Yeah.
there was public water and sewer in at that point.
W.F. Wilson.
Down,
and Son.
he's down.
So it wasn't
on
water,
Broad Street.
it was just
No,
sewer.
it's yes, yes. Everybody no longer needed a septic tank in their yard. Yes, yes. And because,
Or going down the creek.
yes, right. W.F. Wilson did it, and then that's when the Wilsons moved to Middletown.
Well, it's behind.
Good. Well, thank you for coming. It's been great.
Thank you.
If I could ask a quick favor, I started, it only got 2 people here. I'd like to go around and get some individual pictures real quick before you guys take off. Okay? But you can relax.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.